Thank you very much for inviting me. I bring greetings from the Arctic Circle from Rovaniemi, Finland. The Arctic is many times described with many different, sometimes even complex concepts. In the Arctic, we have beautiful, clean environment, or not. We have traditional livelihoods and indigenous peoples living in the area. And we have 3.5 million people living their everyday life in the area. I come from a reindeer herding family. My presentation here today deals with a research project that I've been conducting with my Swedish, Norwegian and Russian colleagues. We have studied indigenous youth in urban areas because urbanization in the indigenous peoples is a very common and global phenomenon. We have studied how the indigenous Sami youth organize and network to impact this urban Sami policy. And our main goal has been the increased understanding among the Sami and non-Sami decision makers, the general public, and Sami youth about the challenges that urbanization poses for Sami youth. Consequently, the possible, can you the previous one? Yes. My field of study has been focusing to international law and also the domestic law of Finland. And I have studied the children's rights and youth rights in international law, but also how our Finnish legislation corresponds with this international law. Especially I have looked into the Convention on the Rights of a Child, the ILO Convention 169 concerning the rights of indigenous peoples, even though Finland has not ratified this convention. And of course, I have studied the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. In general, one can say that we have quite strong Finnish national legislation, and our Finnish domestic norms are relatively well in line with international standards. Consequently, the possible problems of implementation with respect to these international standards are not found so much in laws, but rather in the inadequate implementation of these existing norms in practice. It is also to be noted that in some areas, the Finnish domestic norms go in fact further than Finland's international obligations. One can say that both in the city in the north, Rovaniemi, and also in the capital city of Finland, in Helsinki, the responsible officials argue that there are insufficient financial resources of the municipalities and the cities, lack of Sami-speaking staff, and it makes it difficult to establish and develop, for example, daycare and school teaching in Sami language. We made interviews in different Nordic cities and also in the Kola Peninsula. And when asked about Sami language activities in Rovaniemi, a mother of 3 boys answered, "There's none, very little. I feel angry about that mostly because of my kids." And she continues, "There's only kindergarten in Sami language, otherwise nothing," and so on. Despite the fact that the demographic situation is different in various parts of the circumpolar region, there are general population characteristics that make the various Arctic populations closely related to each other and distinctly different from those residing in the more southern areas of their countries or in other non-circumpolar areas of the northern hemisphere. Fertility, although decreasing, is generally higher in the Arctic when compared to southern parts of Arctic countries and the Nordic countries in Europe as a whole. Mortality is also higher, and life expectancy accordingly is lower. During the last decade of the 20th century, the inflow of population in all the circumpolar regions has been less than the outflow, resulting in a net loss of population due to migration. And here you can see a map of the net migration. The demographic trends in the European Arctic are significantly influenced by migration, north to south and rural to urban, and the influx of people seeking work in the resource extraction and services sectors. The patterns differ across the region. For instance, the population is growing in northern Norway and Iceland, and declining in Finnish Lapland and northwest Russia. In most regions, net out-migration from rural areas has been coupled with the growth of Arctic urban centers. We have about 10,000 indigenous Sami people living in Finland, and nowadays 80% of the indigenous Sami children are born outside their homeland area. They are born in Helsinki. They are in the Nordic countries. They are born in Oslo and in Stockholm. There you can see the biggest kind of Sami settlements in the Nordic countries. People are moving to south. Why we have studied the Sami youth especially? Of course, as I said, this is a global and common phenomenon, but we consider that the Sami youth in particular are placed at center stage both in the demographic event of indigenous urbanization and in the political events surrounding the widening of urban indigenous space. Previous research has also shown that those Sami who move to south, they have difficulties to maintain their identity in urban surroundings. Urbanization in the Arctic, understood as the changes in lifestyle, occurs in areas previously not considered urban. And indigenous people living in cities face particular challenges as their connection to traditional livelihoods and access to language education may be limited. And of course, it's quite natural that people seek economic opportunities, they better education, culture and social networks. So this is why urbanization is a global trend. Young people, especially women, are increasingly moving to Arctic urban centers and cities in the south. And this has raised the share of the elderly population in some areas, resulting in gender and age imbalances and threatening the fabric of social services. Arctic gender issues have recently received more attention, and challenges include male-dominated rural areas and low female participation in traditional and resource-based industries. Signs that all is not well exist in the factors that maintain health, and these include high suicide rates. One could put it shortly and say that women leave the Arctic, men stay or kill themselves. When there are dynamic changes in the government, in culture, and in community and family values, there is a stress on the individual. The inordinate level of change in the Arctic may well contribute to these increased rates of suicide. But one can also say that, for example, in Norway, there is no difference between Sami and Norwegian youth as to suicidal thoughts. Then, what is driving social and cultural changes in the European Arctic? There are many reasons. Of course, the globalization and the demand for natural resources is growing all the time. Then there is a kind of a global cultural change, and local voices are started to be more. The local voices are taken more into consideration nowadays. We researchers are often asked that what should we do or what could we do when we look at these demographic changes in the Arctic. I have listed few here, and we also have noticed in the research project that indigenous people themselves have started to be politically active and raise their concern in public. To conclude, I would like to say that in many countries we have quite strong and effective legislation, but in practice, like the Finnish example shows, we have still a lot to do. Of course, when people are moving to south, indigenous people, it might become also controversy between the indigenous rights to land and waters that distinguishes indigenous peoples from other minorities. So I think it's a social challenge also for the indigenous communities for themselves, this urbanization. Thank you.